Hi, I'm Hayley, and I'm part of our Baptist movement. None of us can escape the pressures that society is currently under. We are living in a cost of living crisis. There's a challenge ahead of us right now. How do we respond with the good news of Jesus? How do we make a difference? How do we bring restoration and healing in the name of Jesus to our communities? During this film, you will hear multiple voices, and I would encourage you to listen. Listen and hear what others are saying, but also hear the voice of the Spirit speaking in and through these people.
So I think for me, the starting point of looking at the cost of living crisis is to situate it in a global perspective. So actually we have a name for it. We call it the cost of living crisis. But there are other parts of the world that has been experiencing economic recession, inflation, and instability for so years that actually they don't have a name for it. And so when I think of developing countries in Asia, in Latin America, and in Africa, they've been going through the cost of living crisis for such a long time that actually they don't have a name for it. It's just inherent. It's part of the landscape. And I think what we are experiencing in the UK, systems failing, strikes here and there, is something that some people grew up accustomed to. For some of us, it's normal. We experience cost of living crisis since birth, even before birth. And so we need to situate the cost of living crisis in that kind of a global perspective to understand that in that sense, that life has always been tough for other parts of the world for such a long time.
So over the last decade, so starting in 2010, we've seen a huge change in poverty in the United Kingdom. So we start the decade with a high but falling number of people in poverty, so about 13.2 million. And we end the decade with 14.6 million, which is a rise, and it's quite a steady rise. But it's not as dramatic as you might expect if you go to communities that have been experiencing poverty. Because the big story is that poverty not only increased, but it concentrated. So we've got a measure of poverty called destitution, which we thought we'd basically eradicated in the UK. It was a very temporary thing that happened to people in very particular circumstances. In 2010, we don't have real numbers for it, but it's hundreds of thousands of people in a year. By 2015, you get to 1.5 million people experiencing destitution. Just before the pandemic, you get to 2.5 million people experiencing destitution. And in those areas where the people who experience poverty live, you can see it, you can taste it in the air, and the churches that serve those areas, when you talk to them about the cost of living crisis, they look at you sort of quizzically and go, our cost of living crisis started 10 years ago. So it's really important to understand what happened to create that. And the first thing I want to tell you is probably not what you're expecting to hear, which it isn't because we got poorer. The average income in the UK went from 28,000 per household to 32,000 per household in that time. The average wealth, which is mainly sort of housing and pensions wealth, went from about 200,000 to about 300,000. The stock exchange increased in value. We had money. We pointed it in a different direction. And as Christians, we should be appalled at that, because that poverty was created not through, not through things breaking down. It was created by our choices. And there's great hope in that, because it can be undone by our choices. But we have to acknowledge that it was our choices that got us there.
I'm Toni. I'm a forensic custody sampling officer for the police. I've been doing that job for 20 years. So when I started, I worked in reception, and I knew I wanted to do the other part of the job, which is checking fingerprints and dealing with people in custody. I like the customer service side of what I do. So I deal with police officers, I deal with people, I deal with other departments, other forces, and it's very varied. So one day I can go in and I could just be sat at my desk looking at fingerprints, and another day I can go in and then go down to a different police station and do training. So it's really varied, and I love my job. It gives me a sense of worth as a person, who I am. This is me. I'm really angry at being put in this position where you can't manage. I'm independent, I've always been independent. So working, I should be quite well off. My wages are really good. 20 years in, I've got a lot of additional benefits and things like that. I can't earn any more because of the childcare aspect of working more hours. And that's even in the week-to-week basis. For after school care for 2.25 hours, it's costing another £88 a month now. I don't expect anything from anybody else, I do it all myself, but I can't make more money. I can't get more money from anywhere to make this work.
Working in a school, we really are seeing a difference. We've seen children come into school with a lunchbox that will consist of a packet of crisps and a couple of biscuits. Or we've seen lunchboxes that have just got a banana and an apple in it. We're seeing children come into school hungry because they haven't had breakfast at home, or they haven't had enough breakfast at home. I've witnessed myself children come into school with the soles falling off their shoes. I've seen children take their shoes off for PE and have holes in their socks. Only today, one of our children going out and putting her gloves on during the day because she's so cold, when all she's actually wearing is a very thin t-shirt and cardi, and it's not enough to keep them warm. Being cold, being hungry, affects children's concentration, it affects their focus, it affects their emotions. Across the board, you can see children getting angrier because they're hungry, and they don't know how to deal with that emotion when they're 4 or 5 years old. And so they hit out, they'll hit their friends, they'll bite their friends, they'll throw things because they just don't know what else to do with themselves. Because they can't concentrate, because they're not focusing as much as they would if they were warm and full in their tummies, it has a knock-on effect in that they're not fully learning the real basics
that they need to learn. Just the fact that they're cold and they're hungry and they're probably tired because they're not sleeping at home if they're cold and hungry. A lot of them aren't making the same amount of progress as we have totally seen in previous years. We have a lot of children still being sent to school when they're ill because they know they'll get that free school dinner, they'll get that slice of toast at break time, they'll be in a building that's heated. The families that I work with, a lot of them are very, very much feeling the pressure from the cost of living crisis. They are clearly struggling and they are standing at our door and asking us what they can do.
The Good Childhood report has just come out, and that comes from the Children's Society, and in that it is so clear that the need is, I would say, desperate. So the report has found that 85% of parents or carers are concerned about the cost of living crisis and the impact that that will have on their household or their family. That is a huge number. And we also know from that report that 49% of parents and carers are worried or concerned around some of the costs that come with education. So whether that's school trips, school uniforms, bags, equipment, there's a concern about how they're going to be able to provide for their children. I often think that there must be so much shame when a family isn't able to provide for their children. And I think we want to do as much as we can to eliminate that sense of shame. When families are under stress, we know that there might be behaviours that we saw that in the pandemic as well, that that the home then doesn't always become the safe place for a child, and so I think we need to be mindful of that, and that's where our safeguarding comes in, and those good practices and the good support around family can mitigate against that as well. But I just think it's really good to be mindful of some of the ripples that might come out when there's a family that's under stress.
I feel really isolated because other people are saying, come and do this with us, or we've booked this for the day, and I obviously do not say it's because I can't afford it, say we've got other plans or things like that, but the reality is I can't afford to be sociable and join my friends doing the things that they do. I can't risk not feeding my kids for a week to just go for a few hours fun in the afternoon. And so, it's actually been quite isolating not having the money. I can sit here and cry quite happily for about an hour, then get my head sorted and start again. Because I don't want it to affect the way they are. I want my kids to have a happy childhood. They've had a rough start already, and now this is just increasing all the pressure all the time. And I haven't got anybody else. And sometimes having a good cry and then putting all your cards on the table and starting again is the answer.
Hi, my name's Symbia. I'm 20 years old. I'm currently a student in Birmingham. I would say the cost of living crisis has had a bigger impact on young people than it is for the rest of society. And I know that sounds a bit biased, but I would say it's the honest truth. And I can't speak for anyone else, but for me personally, it's made life so hard, like so hard, to the point where it has an impact on everything else in life, like education, your mental health, your social, like relationships. It's difficult, it honestly is. A lot of young people are angry, and we're more angry due to the fact that this was like preventable in our eyes. I feel like if the government, I'm gonna say it how it is, if the government handled things a lot better after the pandemic, Brexit, all of these things, we wouldn't be where we are now. So there's a lot of questions to be answered and a lot of angry people.
In some circumstances, it's very stressful to be a child living in the cost of living crisis. Maybe a lot of the material that you will need for your development as an adolescent is not available to you.
I think it's affecting young people because parents nowadays are very stressed because they need to keep up with the bills, they need to make sure they're able to keep places, they need to make sure they'll be able to eat.
Hi, so my name is Ebony and I'm a youth worker at Hebe Foundation. The cost of living crisis is affecting everyone. In terms of young people, I think it particularly affects their future aspirations, employment. A lot of young people are unmotivated, you know. When the government system isn't really stable and strong, a lot of young people, they start to feel like very unstable, very uncertain about their future. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of anxiety in the air right now. A lot of young people are actually turning to medication a lot younger. People are self-medicating. It is quite out of control at the moment.
Elderly people have this bad habit of trying to compare. Back in my day, it's not your day anymore, and that's just the honest truth. And I think they need to be a bit more considerate. A lot of them don't realise it's not just them going through it, it's us as well. And we're growing up in these times and we can't afford to do what they might have been able to do back then. We can't afford to have kids, we can't afford to get married, we can't afford to buy our own houses.
I think I'd say to an older person that you should try and look at the world and think how you're leaving it for your future generations of children, and also, do you really want to leave the world in that kind of state?
The cost of living crisis isn't usually known to young people around the schools, but the effects are clearly have been seen as they suddenly either have to move house or get this or do that, and they become confused and stressed as they don't know what's happening.
Hi, my name is Ami Bahari and I am the CEO and founder of the Hebe Foundation. I've been doing youth work for 30 years. And I can say young people 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago are very different from the ones now. Times are different. It's a big leap actually for young people in general, making that jump from being maybe dependent upon family for their finances and to now having to do it independently. So just things like traveling. So in London, they get free travel up to a certain age, and then all of a sudden it just cuts, and it's expensive to get around. Food is expensive. Obviously, there are some families that are struggling anyway, so young people have had to be bringing in the finances. It's another thing, it's to add on to the growing pile of disappointment and disillusionment that they are feeling with, I guess, technically with us as adults and how we're running this country and we're running the world. So, you know, it's just another thing. It's on top of race, it's on top of gender, it's on top of environment, it's on top of, corruption and what's not, it's on top of scandal, and it's all part of a bigger brewing frustration that young people have for the way how we have, I guess, lived our lives and run this world, and expecting them now to fit into it. And a lot of them don't want to. And why should they?
We're losing a generation of young people who care about the physical needs of people and the earth into which we are called as Christians. And we're wanting to say, well, if we want that generation to come back, we need to address our passive nature of evangelism. We need to reclaim our heart of proclaiming the good news. And yes, that is true, we have to do that. But the authority by which that is proclaimed comes in a recognition that there is healing that is needed in this world. And if we're going to reach this younger generation, we have to understand that those two things are inseparable from one another, and that a person's need is found in the forgiveness of their sins and in our ability to bring people to Christ for their physical well-being.
I do believe now is the season for our young people to rise up and to start taking ownership and to start being the leaders, start being the Joshuas. And sometimes in order for Joshua to come about, Moses has to die. Some of you have to go. I do believe the table is big enough for us all to sit there, including young people.